So I understand that Ron and I are standing between you and happy hour. So we'll be as quick and efficient as possible so you guys can enjoy the happy hour. How many of you guys are going? Okay. It's my first year going, but I've heard it's worth the investment to walk over there. Thank you guys for joining us so late in the day. I'm sure most of you guys have been here all day. We do appreciate you coming. The topic that we're going to talk about for the next hour or so is really diving deep into consulting versus industry. There's career path decisions that you'll likely be faced with coming out of college, early career, mid-career, and late career on whether consulting or industry roles are best for you. And when we're talking about technical roles, as this conference is based on technology, it becomes a pretty important decision. Ron and I both have, we'll introduce ourselves, but we both have backgrounds working in consulting and working in industry and want to provide sort of some food for thought. So as you're making those decisions in your career, you've got some things to think about. Why don't we start with just a brief introduction of who we are. My name is Monika Mueller. I'm the managing director of the Atlanta office for Doherty Business Solutions. Doherty, real briefly, is a company that's been around for about 30 years. We're a local-based consulting company working with Fortune 500s, delivering technology solutions ranging from information management, digital marketing, and strategy as well.
I'm Ron Stacey. I'm a program manager with Doherty here in Atlanta as well. Have a background in consulting like Monika. Mine is a little bit more evenly divided between consulting and industry, though, roughly half and half with each. Started out in a technical role, mainly in data networks and database management, with a little bit of coding. Never professional like you guys, and then moved on to project management roles in the waterfall world and the Scrum world.
My background, just quickly, coming out of college was to start with the Big Four. I think at the time they were probably Big Six or Big Eight. I was on the road all the time, worked at Ernst & Young, went to Pricewaterhouse, decided to get off the road, worked for OnStar, which is a in-vehicle communication system for General Motors, ended up managing a bunch of Deloitte and IBM consultants, and never got really far away from consulting. And then ended up at Doherty in a local-based consulting model, which is sort of the best of both worlds from consulting and actually being able to be home at night and have a life locally. So that's who we are. Let's go ahead and dive into the topic. I'd be interested to know, as we kind of go through this conversation, your perspectives on, your experiences in industry versus consulting, and maybe we could just take a quick poll. How many of you guys are currently in consulting roles? And I want to differentiate contract and consulting just a little bit. So I'm talking more sort of consulting services where you're coming in as a project team delivering a technology solution for a client. How many of you guys are in those types of roles today? One? We'll have you come up here and present with us. How many of you are in industry then, working for, okay. So more Fortune 500 or mid-size? Fortune 500? Okay. All right. So I hope to provide you a really good perspective on consulting as we go through this. So there's three main, or really a couple main areas that we'll cover today. We'll talk about potential paths to grow your technical career. We'll talk about the pros and cons of industry versus consulting and things to consider as you're making those decisions. And then we'll actually do a little exercise with each of you to determine, based on your skill sets, based on your personality, where you actually best align. And maybe we'll be surprised and realize that 90% of you really should be in consulting and not in industry. But we'll do that interactive exercise together. So there's really two paths to take to achieve your goals as a technical professional. You can work in industry, so that's commercial, government, nonprofit organizations, or you could work in a consulting organization. So we've talked about the Ernst & Youngs and the Pricewaterhouse, or the national firms, right? But there's also local models like Doherty, where Ron and I come from, Slalom, JBN, those are local consulting-based models. And then we've got niche consulting models that focus on a particular slice of industry technology, but all in the realm of delivering capabilities and services to clients. So which is the right path for you? Obviously, a lot of you have decided industry is the right path for you. But charting your direction. which way do you go? Which way do you decide to go? And as we walk through this, there's different things to consider depending upon the phase that you are in your career. But it really does depend. What are the pros and cons of each, right? And when is it the right move for you to go from industry to consulting? What are the possible tracks, and how do you go about doing that? How do you make a jump from industry to consulting and from consulting to industry? And we'll talk about that.
In addition, I'll talk a little bit about who are you in terms of self-assessing your own traits and matching those with whether you might be comfortable in the consulting world or comfortable continuing in the industry side of things. And we'll talk a little bit at the end about how you go about it for each of these main tracks.
So let's talk about industry. What is the major difference between working in an industry role versus in a consulting role? If you're a person that likes very defined boundaries, predictability, right? You kind of want to know where you're going to drive every day, what your job responsibilities are, who your boss is, who your peers are, who reports to you, what's the technology stack that you're going to work on. Industry is a fantastic place for you because you do get that predictability, right? If you, however, are a person who strives on ambiguity, wants to have constant change, wants to learn and be stretched to learn new technologies at a very rapid pace, then I would suggest that consulting is possibly the right avenue for you. As I talk through it, you can already start to think through the pros and cons of each. I think the best advice I ever received going into consulting is that I would know maybe 70% of what I need to do to fulfill any consulting role that I have successfully, and the other 30% I would have to stretch and grow, and I would have to do it seamlessly without the client knowing it. But it is that 30% of stretching that exponentially grows you as an individual and helps to grow your career. But you do have to be comfortable with a certain level of ambiguity, because in consulting, your boss will change depending upon your project. You'll be working in different industries, new clients, they have new vernacular, culture, technology. So there's a lot of ambiguity that comes around consulting. So I view consulting to be, okay, a little bit of ambiguity, or maybe a lot, and industry is just a bit more predictable. And that's not to say you don't have opportunities to progress and grow. You certainly do in an industry environment, but it's likely going to be at a slightly slower pace than you would find in consulting.
It's been said by some that a year in consulting in terms of opportunities for growth and stretching your skills and training and that sort of thing is worth as many as 3 years in industry.
So let's talk about the pros and the cons of each. Certainly lots of pros in working in industry roles, and I'd love to hear if you guys agree or disagree with these. There is a perceived level of stability, right? And I do say perceived because I think in our day and age, stability is dependent upon economy and how your business is doing. But I think generally there's a perception if I take an industry job, I'm going to be a little bit more stable. Connection with the sector, the industry, you sort of can become an industry expert, right? You'll be working within the same, if you're in telecommunications working at AT&T, you will certainly learn a lot of domain knowledge around the telecommunications industry as you move within the organization. You'll have predictable hours. I will say there's probably much more life balance associated with an industry position than sometimes you'll find in consulting, because consultants tend to sign up for very aggressive timelines and need to deliver against those timelines. And then learning interpersonal skills, understanding organizational politics, I think is much faster learned in an industry position than in consulting. When you're in consulting, you tend to be able to come in and stay away from the organizational politics that are happening. You certainly have your own internal organization to deal with, but within kind of learning how to navigate that, I do feel it's a little bit slower of a learning curve in consulting versus in industry. Ron, do you want to talk about the cons of?
Sure. The cons of the industry side of the career path are essentially the mirror image of what Monika has just discussed. Because you're doing the same type of role frequently for long periods of time, there's a risk of some stagnation in terms of both skills and perhaps boredom with doing the same types of skills or the same types of work. Frequently, the opportunities for promotion are a little bit slower in industry than they are in consulting, just simply because you're moving at a more rapid pace. Typically in consulting, you're moving from account to account and really having an opportunity to create value for the company, and that tends to lead to a faster promotion path in consulting. As we said about organizational politics and hierarchy and siloing, on the plus side, you learn how an organization works and how management hierarchy works. On the negative side, you're a subject to that sort of hierarchical structure and some of those organizational or office politics. It can be more challenging to network. Networking opportunities tend to be within the industry or with partner organizations, whereas in consulting the network is a lot more broad, perhaps. And it's typically the case that salary opportunities, both starting and in terms of advancement, can be lower in industry than in consulting.
So I'd be curious, based on your experiences, and most of you guys are in here from an industry position, is there anything you would add from a pros or cons perspective to this list? Is everything on here sort of kind of how you perceive it as well? Yes?
In industry, basically you own something. So the ownership aspect comes into picture. Consulting is like you do your job and keep moving.
Yeah.
You don't actually need the benefits.
Yes, I completely agree. And I would actually list that as a con for consulting because it is sometimes very difficult to work passionately towards something and then you have to leave and you never get to see sort of that system really improve or achieve the business case that was originally set out for it. So I agree with you on that. Yes?
And extending that was that sometimes you don't get the chance, the opportunity to learn from your mistakes with the scar tissue.
Yeah.
Consulting, you come up with an idea, you think it's good, you put it into place, and you leave
before you see it fall down and fail. Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
Other benefits for industry is normally it has more stable and where the people's interaction. You could have the opportunity to be in the company 10 or 15 years,
right?
And then dealing with some good friends. So that may be missing from consulting.
That's a good point. Okay. All right, let's keep going.
All right, great. Well, let's take a look at the consulting pros and cons.
So they're inverse, really, to industry, right? I will, and Ron mentioned this, I do firmly believe 1 year in consulting is equivalent to about 2 or 3 years in industry because you're just forced to learn. And that pace, I've been on projects that are 6 weeks in length, 6 months in length, or a year in length, and every time that you make a move, there's a whole set of things you've got to learn very, very quickly. You do get multi-industry exposure. I do a lot of hiring for our company, and I will say that it is an asset to have a diversified portfolio of industries that you can operate within. Sometimes people get very siloed and they become very narrow in terms of their job opportunities. So always be thinking of that as you're looking to make your next move in your career. Unless you're diving into becoming an industry subject matter expert, having a couple of different industries in your background is actually going to be an asset. Variety and change. If you get bored and have ADD and ADHD like I probably do, you will thrive in a consulting environment because change is the only constant factor that there is. There's continuous opportunities for learning and improvement. For example, in our organization, we have about 80 learning events that happen every single year that's open to every one of our consultants. Consulting companies understand that their brand are their consultants, and if their consultants are not current, if not current, maybe one step ahead of the technology curve, understanding best practices and methodologies, then we're degrading the brand. So there's a significant emphasis on learning and development. You're going to get exposure to senior people, which obviously breeds opportunities for learning. And consulting, you will definitely be interacting at the director, VP, senior VP, CIO, CEO levels. And that grows as you grow within your career, and that obviously has significant benefits from an ongoing networking perspective. There's the travel is interestingly listed as a pro, but is equally a con. There comes a point where you realize travel is not quite as exciting as it sounds because you're in an airplane, in a taxi, in a conference room, in a taxi, back in an airplane. And you haven't really seen the city. And oftentimes, consulting projects can be in the middle of Iowa, and it's not really that exciting. So it starts off, I think, when you're in your early career as a pro, and then at some point it really does become a very big negative to be in the consulting environment. There are downsides to consulting, and Ron and I have lived them. It's extremely fast-paced. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of deadlines that are very aggressive. There is very lots of challenge in terms of life balance. I don't think I've seen a 40-hour work week any week that I've been in consulting. So that's just something you have to be comfortable with and be able to support. And again, it's difficult to keep a social network because you're traveling. If you are traveling, you sort of lose connection to your local community, your neighbors, let alone professional networking as well. So definitely ups and downsides to consulting.
Oh, all right, so we'll take a look a little bit.
Yes.
Previous slide, I have a question.
Absolutely.
Sure.
The first pro and the second one
Mm-hmm. The first pro, rapid skill development and training. And the bottom being limited opportunity to learn organizational hierarchical skills. This here is around that sort of internal politics that we were talking about. You don't, in a consulting organization, oftentimes I'm not even at my home office. I'm at a client site. So I'm detached a bit from the politics of my corporate headquarters. I'm certainly not getting my hands dirty in the politics of my client. So that limited learning is around how to navigate the politics that happens within an organization, because consultants can detach from it. Where if you're in an industry position, you have to learn how to navigate politics to be able to survive and propel yourself in the organization.
It's frequently the case that when you're a consultant in the field at a consulting contract, you've got one or two contacts there at the client initially, a client manager that may be a C-level person, maybe a VP or a director level, and you're sort of on an island. You don't initially know the context in terms of the upward and downward flow of management authority, the politics, who's got budgeting or conflicting interests hard, and that sort of thing. And that's the sort of thing that, of course, you absorb and kind of know instinctively when you're working in an industry position. You're part of that. You're part of that matrix. In consulting, not to say that you can't learn it, but it's more difficult because you tend to be isolated from those power structures within the client companies. Any other questions? Go.
Let's move on.
Thank you.
All right. So when and what? Consulting, let's talk about it early. I don't think anybody here is fresh out of college. Let me know if I'm wrong. All right. So early career. The pros of entering a consulting environment in early years is because of that rapid growth, right? That rapid ability to understand new industries and technologies. You get a lot of variety and change, which is quite appealing to you. Sometimes coming out of college, you don't really know what you want to do, and you don't have to decide in consulting because you're getting exposed to lots of different things. You're going to start to develop competencies and tools, and quite honestly, you probably will start out of college at a higher salary point than you would if you went into an industry position. Going into sort of mid-career, you start to build your competency tools, right? You become kind of familiar with one particular industry, vertical, technology, and you begin to hone your professional skills. Right now, you're probably dealing with, director, senior VP, up to senior VP type people. And so networking is great for you individually. And then, of course, salary, I'm very much believe is a much higher trajectory from a consulting perspective than an industry. So that continues to be a pro. Now, later in your career, after you've sort of, talking sort of the partner ranks within a consulting organization, that's kind of when you get a little bit of flexibility. But you kind of had to have paid your dues to get there. You get a little flexibility, you get to control your hours a little bit, you get to control your focus and where you want to be within the organization. And there's a lot of satisfaction, right, in being able to apply your internal knowledge to help clients, or really now at this point mentor and coach other consultants that are coming up in their career. Yes?
You described that as if late in your career you've been consulting all along.
Yes.
For a fair amount of people, they're attracted to industry mid-career because that's also the time when the family life wants them to be more stable.
Absolutely. And that is a big con that we're going to go through. A lot of people exit consulting usually anywhere from 7 years to 10 years in. And I'll be honest, it differs from women to men. Women tend to exit in consulting a little bit earlier for obvious reasons, for starting families, and travel is just not conducive to that. So you'll see as we go through the negatives of consulting and then talk about industry, there does seem to be an exodus around mid-career. I will say that's where the local consultancies really are starting to become a huge entity in our local markets, because if you've kind of enjoyed the consulting path, going into industry is going to be a bit of a challenge. And local consulting allows you the opportunity to be a consultant, to do service delivery, and then also not have to travel. So it's a very attractive value proposition.
We really see a lot of flow into and out of consulting and industry at all points in the career. It's a typical career path may be coming into consulting right out of school in order to gain that experience, that rapid experience and that training, and maybe have the excitement of travel and that sort of thing. On the other hand, you may have someone coming right out of school into industry to build a specific vertical competency. Ditto at the mid-career level. People are coming out of consulting for the reasons that Monika mentioned. Some people are coming in because they've been in industry now for 15, 20 years, and they're starting to feel bored and stagnant. We see the same thing in the late career as well. We see people coming out of consultancy going into more senior industry roles, into director and VP type slots and things like that. And we see people who are late in their career that have developed a strong competency in industry coming and joining typically niche or specialized consulting firms where they're applying their great depth of knowledge to help other companies in similar situations.
Yes.
Detailed question about the salary, and we know consulting job pays more, but does that cover like health care benefits? That's one thing. Another thing is about hourly rate. For the working hour, you said if you work more than 40 hours. If, for example, you worked 80 hours per week, so did you get paid by double? So that is a straight question.
So true story. I was probably 5 years into my consulting career coming out of college and was on a project, unrealistic deadlines, but we were going to finish it. I think I was working probably a good 70 hours a week along with my peers. And so we made the mistake of sitting down and doing an hourly calculation. What are we making per hour based on the number of hours we were working? We were making less than we had been working at McDonald's. So yes, you do have to consider that. I will say there are organizations out there, Doherty is one of them, where they will compensate you in one way or another for the extra over 40 hours that you work. Our company actually pays you for every hour that you work that's over 40 beyond your base annual salary, which is it's like real-time revenue sharing back with our consulting base. When I was at Capgemini, they would bank your hours and allow you to take vacation, up to extra 2-3 weeks a year. So different companies have different compensation models to recognize that. But it is a good point, and it didn't feel good to realize I was killing myself. I could have just been flipping burgers.
And the second question is, I heard some friends when the hours they were counting, sometimes the travel time counts. Sometimes the travel time doesn't count. So for example, they counted, they charge the client from the time they leave their home.
Yeah.
So from home to airport and the time. So
Sure.
is that normal or
No, I think normal business practices would say that you're not going to charge a client for the time that you drive or fly, right, to that client. That's just absorbed as business costs within the company.
I seem to be taking the role of devil's advocate here because I'm going to offer a counterexample to Monika's. I spent time at Capgemini as well, and as Monika says, extra hours above 40 were typically banked, and there was some compensation. Although the time that I was with Capgemini, sort of minimal expectation, or the average expectation was 50 hours a week. So there was some of that trade-off. However, I left Capgemini after a number of years there, went back into industry, and in my last industry role before coming to Doherty, I was working on average 70, 75, sometimes 80 hours a week. Doherty pursued me, called me twice, and the second time they called me, and I'd just come off a run of I think 6 weeks of 80-hour weeks, and so the work-life balance that's offered by Doherty and offered by many of the local consultancy models sounded really, really good. And my experience has been that it's been a lot better work balance working in the consulting industry with Doherty.
We won't mention that Ron is a complete workaholic as well. So some of that is in your own control too, right?
Yes, some maybe.
All right, well, let's keep the discussion going, and let's move forward in the presentation here. So the cons, right? You guys were starting to talk about that. Clearly, work-life balance is going to be an issue, especially in your early years in consulting. Social connections, right? You become friends with the people you work with, but at the end of the week, they all fly back to their cities, and you're kind of stuck thinking, what are you going to do on a Friday night at home? And the constant change and stretch demands, if you're not that personality, will be very stressful for you. I would always, though, recommend a person coming out of college start at a consulting position, because your first salary out of college sets kind of the floor for your future salary increases. So you kind of always want to get into the best position that you can. Mid-career, heavy travel still, right? You were mentioning that earlier. That's a huge negative. You're still struggling to find that work-life balance. I will say in consulting, you have your delivery responsibilities within a project, but if you do want to excel and move up in a consulting organization, there is this sort of expectation that you are involved in the operations of the company in one way or another, whether it's, helping recruit, do interviews, be part of initiatives, events, internal development opportunities. And that's usually, a good 5, 10, depending upon how quickly you want to progress, on top of your 40 plus hours within a consulting delivery role. So that's something that's a big differentiator, I think, that's not necessarily expected in an industry type position. Late career, travel, again, especially if you're in the Big Four and you're in those partner ranks, you are on the road all the time because you are the person out there selling the business. And your role has most likely transitioned from doing delivery to doing sales. And it's a certain special skill set and a special group of people that can really make that transition and feel comfortable doing sales with clients. So your expectations have quite changed late in your career. Again, there's still that constant change, and there's pace and pressure. And again, I will again highlight that if you want to have a long career, there certainly has to be a sales acumen that you have to develop in order to rise to those higher ranks. Have any of you guys that are in industry now have been consulting organizations in the past? I'd be curious to see how the switch was from consulting into industry. Was that an easy transition for you? Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Was it easy for you to move into an industry role, or did you miss? Very easy? Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. You got to be able to stretch without breaking. Somebody else had a switch from consulting to industry. How was that experience? Do you find yourself feeling stagnant at all, or are you pretty happy with the work itself? Yeah. So far, so good. Okay. Excellent. Yes?
In my case, I've been alternating, going between industry and consulting. If you work for a fast-paced company in the industry, like small companies, it's a different field. It's far faster than consulting.
I think that's a very good point. That's an excellent point. If you're working for like a product development company, for example, there's a significant amount of growth, challenge, new, exciting things that you can do. I guess when I put this together, I'm thinking more the Fortune 500, the Coca-Colas, the AT&Ts of the world. But that may be the sweet spot, right? To find that smaller company that you can help kind of grow and shape and develop, whether it's product focused or not, and that kind of gives you the best of both worlds, right? Industry and consulting. So it's great. Congratulations on finding that. Anybody else want to share their experience? Anybody have a bad experience going from consulting to industry? Okay. Maybe we should try it. You guys are hiring, let me know. All right, so let's talk about industry, and you guys have a lot you can offer here. So early career, you're building those organizational skills, industry connections. You've got a lot of ability to influence life balance here, and have good flexibility. But you're also starting to develop kind of a knowledge depth in something, right? And that's always a good thing. Again, I'm going to hit this home for anybody that is advising college-age children. Start off in consulting and then make them switch. Because in your early career, the life balance isn't quite as important as it will be in the later years. As you go into mid-career, you're building your network and reputation within the company. You probably have understood the organization, right, and how to navigate it. Work-life balance still continues to be a pretty positive thing. And then late career, if things have gone well, you're probably in a very comfortable senior type role, right? You're a senior director, a VP, or even in the executive ranks. And you've got hierarchical authority, which is very different than what you'll ever have in consulting. There's a very, unless you're a partner or leading a competency area within consulting, really nobody in consulting has hierarchical power. It's much more influential in terms of leading and guiding, because you're never going to have people that are always just directly reporting to you. So it does force you to learn a little bit differently around how to lead and motivate and guide people. But in organizations, there's a hierarchy, there's an org chart that's published, you know who your boss is and your boss's boss, and you learn to navigate that well. On the downside of being in industry, again, earnings, it's not always the most important thing, but it's certainly something to be thinking about. You're going to start at a lower plane. You've got limited influence, right, in your early years, and access to leadership is probably limited. You've got no travel. That's a con, because when you're young, travel's kind of cool and exciting, and that's a great time to do it. And then, you're probably put into, especially coming out of college where you don't have a breadth of skills yet, you're probably put in something that's very narrow that you're going to execute. And you'll learn that really well, but you might not learn the neighboring skill sets as quickly. Mid-career, you've got, limited network within the organization that you work in and the industry that you're involved in. Again, your earnings are going to be at a slower trajectory than in consulting. You're going to be involved and sucked into organizational politics. Is there anybody here from a company that does not have politics? Because I would like to join. Politics, as you grow higher and higher levels within an industry, I think is very significant. I see our clients suffering through that. Lots of power struggles over money, people, ownership, scope, breadth, and you will have to be a part of that. It's a long, involved process for advancement. I will say in the national consulting firms, there is an up-or-out model. If you're not getting promoted every couple of years, you will likely be pushed out of the organization. Local consulting models, I think, have found a different way where they're not up or out, but there's also no minimum or maximum stay. You can get promoted every year if you demonstrate the capabilities to be able to achieve that next level. Where I think in industry, there's much more rigor around HR and guidelines and salary bands and how long you have to be in a role. And sometimes you've got to wait for your boss to quit, be fired, or die for you to have that opportunity to move into that role. Where that doesn't exist in consulting. There's no quotas of how many people can be at certain roles because there's no hierarchy. Late in your career, some things to think about. Your focus is probably pretty narrow. And again, I've seen lots of resumes, and the narrow tends to fall on the negative side unless you are going to be that industry expert, and that's your claim to fame, and that's what you're going to market with. But if you get really narrow, you do cut out lots of opportunities that are going to be available in the market. You could start to get bored and stagnant if you don't, work for a company that's constantly trying out new technologies and stretching the boundaries of innovation. And then organizational politics might kill you at that point, or you have learned it and are rising to the top as a result of it. And then, you've got sort of the risk of being, early retirement, organizational realignments and changes. I mean, I don't know if any of you guys are from Coca-Cola. But I think Coke just went through another big reorganization. I think they're laying off, 10,000 up to 30,000. I've heard some different numbers. So, that's always a bigger risk, I feel, in industry than in consulting.
And speaking from the point of view of someone who's run an IT department in industry, when there is pressure put upon you as a manager of one of those departments to cut headcount, you've got to do it, and it tends to have a disparate impact on people who've been around longer. That it's not necessarily ageism, but they're making more money. You can get more people for cheaper by getting rid of those that are making the most money, and that is definitely a factor out there in industry.
Any of you challenge any of this, or does this resonate? Is there a different point of view that any of you guys have? Yes.
I would just say, I've seen in our at Home Depot, we have a large IT department servicing so many different sectors of the company. I've seen where people are able to move up by changing departments and stuff like that. It's coupled, I'm sure, with networking as well.
Yes.
Obviously.
Yes.
But
I do think if you're very comfortable, it's a large company, and it's one of our clients. So we probably know each other somehow, somewhere. I agree with you, absolutely. If you're going to be in an industry role, the best way to continue to learn is to move around, right? Is to raise your hand and say, I'm interested in a different technology, a different department, a different domain. And if you've networked, you'll likely get those opportunities. Are you really? Good. I'm sure that'll go great. If it doesn't, just call Ron.
Yes.
You're mentioning like you are kind of in that manager role and don't do much programming ever. And so you have been both industry and consulting. And we also talked about when you're doing consulting, there isn't really much direct hierarchy management for you to do. So can you just clarify a little bit on that? How different a role of manager in the industry versus in consulting?
Sure. There's quite a bit of difference. I came out in my previous role of a managerial role, running a portfolio management office. So one of the key differences is that I wasn't really hands-on in terms of applying my skill set. As I said, I made the switch about mid-career from technical roles to project management roles, and spent the last 18 years, I guess, in project management roles. When I got to that level, running a portfolio office, I was essentially supervising project managers and getting after them in terms of compliance and receiving reports and shuffling papers. I wasn't doing any project management. There was limited opportunity for that. I have a program manager role at Doherty now, currently, and it is directly hands-on. I go to clients, I run programs, I help them repair their portfolio management offices. I'm applying the skills that I learned and which I have an interest in applying. So that's the key difference. I guess the other side of the equation is there's the hierarchical power thing. There's pros and cons to that, obviously. In my previous role, I sat 2 levels below a VP. It's nice to have access to senior executives like that, but on the other hand, you have a big hot spotlight on you, and it's not necessarily when something you do as a misstep, but when someone in your organization does something that's a misstep. In consulting, obviously, you have a spotlight on you as well, because you're there to provide solutions for the client. But my feeling is you have a lot more control over it, because it's based on your skills, your abilities, the work that you put in, and it feels like a more controlled situation to me. So, does that answer the question well for you?
Thanks. So, do you have any average
years in early career or mid career or late career, like average years the person will be in the early career stage?
Sure, I would classify the early career probably, the first year out of college to maybe 6 or 7, and then the mid-career is probably 7 to 12 years and 13 and above for a senior. If you stay in consulting the entire time, by the time you get to your 12th, 13th year, you should be at the the brinks of being a partner or being a partner already if you've managed your career well. Do you have retirement, the ability to retire? Well, the goal is always to, because you are maximizing your income in a consulting environment, is to be able to retire a little bit early. Yeah. Consulting values knowledge and drive, right? So whatever age you are, if you've got the drive and the knowledge, you will still be an asset to a consulting organization.
One thing about traveling, some people were able to work while we were on the airplane or in the taxi, and some people they said, "Hey, I cannot take red-eye flight." And just one technical question: would any different level and determine are you going to be in the first class?
That is a great question. When times were really good, you guys remember like the mid-1990s, right? The years that I was at Ernst & Young during that time, yes, everybody flew first class. And we also had a concierge that, and I had 2 dogs at the time, and I could pay the concierge $5. The rest of it was subsidized by Ernst & Young to go walk my dogs. And that's what I did. So when times are good, yes, but right now I feel like everybody's running lean, and I think there's also a recognition that the client is paying for your travel expenses, right? So you got to be a little bit reasonable. So most companies that I know have guidelines. If you're flying international, they may consider putting you in business class, but if you're just flying nationally within the United States, I probably wouldn't personally feel right flying first class and then charging my client for it. I think it's very dependent upon the policies of the company, but I've seen companies get very conscious about expenses, especially, not only internally, but for what the client has to absorb as well. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, the first class days are pretty much over. And that's a big thing as you go from a national consultancy to a local. You're not the million whatever member of Delta and you see your status go and then you walk past first class and you realize, as I did flying on Friday back from Chicago, my seat was the last one in the airplane. And that's the downside of not traveling anymore. But it's worth it. It's definitely worth it. Yes?
What is the general trend about the dress code?
So, yeah, in terms of at the client side, there are definitely 2 philosophies of thought. I'll tell you what I think most consulting companies will guide their consultants, and I'll tell you my personal one, which is a little bit different. I've always been told to dress just one step above what your client is dressing, because you always want to err on the side of being very professional. To me, that's one step removed from the culture of the client. So if my client is coming in with business casual, I don't feel comfortable showing up in a business suit. So I will dress to what the client is dressing. But I think conventionally, a lot of people are guided to dress just one step above. Any particular reason you asked that?
Because I'm not comfortable with formal. If I want a coat, I want a coat. I want to relax.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we've got a development center in our Atlanta office, and, we had to sort of say, look, no flip-flops. But in absence of that, it's definitely much more casual. Sitting in agile rooms with your team members is not conducive to a suit and tie. Any more questions?
So traditionally, consulting means expression on client side, right?
Yes.
How does the new world of people telecommuting affect the business?
We're seeing a few different trends. One is that our clients are experiencing significant real estate issues themselves, right? They are running out of space. I mean, we have one client that is so out of real estate space from a parking perspective that all of the consultants need to park about a quarter of a mile away and get shuttled in. And then office space is an issue. If we leave it to the discretion, it's one of the value adds that a consultancy that has a local presence can provide. We're more than happy to be on site, but we're also more than happy to do the development work either remotely or from our development center. It does end up being the decision of the client. We make all the options available. Some clients have that culture of I need to see you physically, and some are very comfortable with the concept of telecommuting and remote work. Okay. I do want to make sure we get to the part where you guys do a little bit of self-assessment on your own personality traits. So maybe we could maybe go through here a little bit to get to that, if you don't mind.
All right. We'll move into that. So really, these last two slides are on that topic. There's certain traits that are associated with industry. We talked about those: stability and clearly delineated areas of responsibility and a sense of belonging, things like that. Consulting typically also has its own areas of character traits: adaptive, flexibility, short attention span, easily bored, perhaps. Monika joked earlier about ADD. I'm not sure that all of us in consulting don't actually have ADD, but the ability to adapt to that flexibility environment. So there's a few different ways to look at assessing yourself in terms of your personality traits. Obviously, you have a pretty good internal sense of who you are and what you value, but there are a few systems that formalize this a little bit more. Probably a lot of people have heard about Myers-Briggs or MBTI. It gets used pretty frequently. I think I read that 75% of the Fortune 100 companies have used it at some point or another. It's an old system developed in the 40s, interestingly enough, not by a psychologist or a professional in HR or anything like that, but in fact by a housewife. It's pretty unscientific, and it tends to vary over time. The same people take the same test, and it changes over time. So it has limited use despite its widespread application. Probably people have heard of DISC. It's a little bit more recent. It's a 4 personality type model. It's a little bit more expensive to apply. And then SDI is another very involved model. What I chose to look at today is to give you a limited slice of the innate trait system. It has some of the best aspects of Myers-Briggs in that it defines personality types, and it's fairly accurate. But it goes one better in that it tends to be accurate for 90% of people, and it tends to not vary over time. So I've done an extract of that and created a little exercise for you on that. So we talked a little bit about that. It remains stable over time. There's 10 WorkLife profiles or types that are yielded that have different characteristics, different styles of interaction between them, different drivers in terms of what they value at work and how they do in different work environments. And then the full system has some analysis and a personal profile and that sort of thing. So I developed a extract of this system as an exercise. We created these packages originally as take-home exercises since we were not quite sure whether we'd have the time to get everybody to do these within the presentation. So we've got a few packages here. I can see from the attendance in the room and the stack of packages that we've underestimated the needs of these packages pretty seriously. So we'll put this stack out there. Those of you who can grab one, great. Perhaps you can share one. I'll put the package on screen as well. And what I'll do is I'll put a stack of my cards on the table out here beside them. And those of you who would like, please feel free to email me, and I will send you a PDF of it. So let's go ahead and put those out there.
I will walk around with my broken ankle. Thank you, Ron.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm going to definitely not have enough. Maybe you guys can share. Thank you very much. Okay.
Okay, great. Well, let's
Just as a time check, we've probably only got about 7 minutes or so probably just get you started. The intent of this is if you sort of fill out the sort of you're on the left side or the right side, there's a graph that you circle. It'll help you identify kind of if you're on the traits, if you have the personality traits that would lean towards industry versus the personality traits that would lean towards consulting. So we'll kind of get you started, so if you're interested, you can finish this exercise at home.
Great. Okay, so this is the take-home package that we created here. This is a little bit of explanation on the innate trait system, how it works. And basically what we've done is we've extracted a small questionnaire that is a lot less extensive than the full system. There is a rating scale here. There's 5 lists for your work-life drivers. These are your core drivers of work-life balance and what's important to you in work and that sort of thing. Those of you that have a package can take this. If you'd like to work through it on the screen, we can do that as well. And then we'll talk a little bit about the conclusions to come out of those. List 1 is essentially more cooperation versus more command. Cooperation is more on the left side. Command is more on the right side. So, is it more important to be part of the team, to work with an established plan, to have a flexible approach? Is it more important to exercise control, on the other hand, or be oriented towards the future and a to-be vision and setting the agenda and that sort of thing? The idea here is that you pick a number here at somewhere on the scale in terms of where you fall closest to.
So how many of you guys would associate yourself with the right side? So this is, and you're in industry or consulting? Yeah. Maybe you want to think about something else. So were there anybody else that associated themselves on the right side? Open-minded. You can sort of start to see the personality traits that would lead you to industry versus consulting. Are most of you here on the left side? Yeah? Okay.
Okay, and again, the second list, you're looking at a set of characteristics on the left and right. Are you more internally focused, or more of a thinker, more analytical, a little bit more withdrawn? Are you reserved about new ideas? Some of these characteristics are stereotypically associated with development, but not necessarily, obviously. On the right hand, you've got the enthusiasm for new ideas, the extrovert type of characteristics, and open to expression and that sort of thing. Again, the rating there is purely subjective, but the idea is to take your first whack at it. What's your first impression? So how many people are more on that extroverted side? All right, probably not surprising. And the bulk of you are more on the introverted side. Okay. List 3 is more about, I guess, logic and rationality and results driving, the impatience with stumbling blocks and that sort of thing on the left side, versus steadiness, focus on harmony, sensitivity to emotions, being relationship driven and tolerant on the right side. So again, by show of hands, right side versus left side. Okay.
Right side?
Yeah.
Left side.
Okay. All right. Okay. And we won't read through this too much more. The list 4 is vagueness of information versus specificity of information. Left side is you're comfortable with more general, you're more spur of the moment, you're comfortable with verbal communication and improvisation. Right side is focus on specifics, very structured, an analytical or organizational approach, prefer tasks in writing, being focused on tasks, that sort of thing. Again, by show of hands, right side versus left side. All right. I think we're starting to see a trend here. All right. And the final list on work-life drivers is the trust factor, really. On the left side, you're more guarded, you're less trustful, you're more inclined towards critical or incisive thinking. On the right side, you're more open-minded, more trusting, more accepting, that sort of thing. Left side? Okay, the bulb, right side, some on the right side as well. So we do have some variety. The following scale is just three. Let me get back here where I am. Three, and these are your drivers on attitudes. What you find beneficial in work life. So in scale 1, on the left side, you're more towards oriented towards content and well-established information and known processes. On the right side, more towards pioneering and creating new content and exploring the unknown. We won't go through and poll you on each of these, but you can consider that again on the same scale. Scale 2 is caution versus risk. On the left side, more cautious, more analytical, need for more data before making the decision. Right side is more risk-taking and moving ahead with fuzzy data. And likewise, the final scale is how anchored you are versus how creative you are, really is what it boils down to. So for those of you that have the test or that have been following along, the instructions are to take your results here and chart them on this type of chart. These are for the work-life balance, and this is an example. The results here being the data point, with 3 being obviously right in the middle. It is perfectly fine to incline towards one side or the other of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, depending on how strongly you feel about that aspect, and then you just simply plot the data points and graph it. So there is within the package, for those of you who have the package or would like a copy afterwards, a blank chart for you to carry out that charting exercise. And again, we saw that on list 1, it was cooperative versus take charge, reserved versus outgoing, fast-paced versus patient, spontaneous versus planned, and skeptical versus trusting. And the pattern on these core balances gives you a typical look for 10 different types of profiles here. And obviously your chart doesn't need to look exactly like this, but there is a specific pattern that emerges as people answer these questions.
For those of you that took it, where did you guys fall in? Nowhere. You're not chartable? Mostly left side.
All right, so if we look at something that falls a lot on the left side, influencer tends to fall a lot on the left side. And we see a heavy on the right side for those who are reflective. Most people tend to fall somewhere in the middle, and that's fairly typical. Those who have a technical bent will frequently fall strongly on one side or the other of a line on some characteristics and not on others, as we see in influencer or in reflective. I've worked with engineers, for example, that were strongly linked to influencer personality types. All right, so last thing here that we'll do, in this package we look at what the characteristics of each of those are. And we'll flip back to the presentation in a minute and we'll talk about how those associate with consulting profiles versus industry profiles. All right, and in this package, for those of you who would like it, there's some additional resources and some contact information. For those of you who did not get a package or a card, my address is very simple, ronald.stacey@doherty.com. Feel free to contact me and I will send you a PDF of this package. All right, so let's flip back to the presentation and wrap this up. All right, so here's the different styles we saw again, assuming my machine is going to cooperate here. Okay, here's the different styles we saw again. So there are some styles that are clearly associated with industry profiles, people who are relationship builders, who are intent on building a community, engaging with a group, with a professional community, with friends, with long-standing peers, that sort of thing. There are some traits that are fairly strongly associated with consulting. Those who are adaptive, those who would like to influence the direction of a company without having to wait till they're a CIO, strategists, that sort of thing. And those that aren't circled are profile types that are fairly neutral, that are comfortable in either type of situation.
Do you guys associate yourself with the green or the red? You do? So you're on the red side. Green. Okay. Anybody else associate themselves on the green side? Okay. So you might want to think about consulting.
Worth considering whether that should be an option. Yeah. Most of our lives are dedicated in our professions, so you want to really be passionate about what you do and make sure you're best aligned.
So you showed us the graph of the beginner, the mid-career, and the end of career. To help put that in perspective, what is the normal salary range for each one of those positions?
You want to give away the secret sauce, huh? Ask the hard questions. All right, so I got to put the disclaimer. It's going to depend if you work for a national firm, a local firm, for a niche firm. Shall we? Let's do that. Let's talk about, slalom. I would say coming out of college, undergraduate, you should probably be, and especially if you're in the technology field. So let's focus on what's probably most interesting to you guys. Coming out of college, the salary ranges for developers, software engineers will be anywhere from $50,000 to $75,000. Why? Because it depends on your aptitude, the college that you went to, if you did an internship, what you can demonstrate, the need of the company that is trying to hire you. That's probably a decent range, I would say. That's the starting point, and then you grow from there. In consulting, for sure, you're at certain levels, you're kind of not worried so much about your base salary anymore, because your incentives are you're incented in a way where you're doing more sales development or internal practice development, and you have bigger bonuses. So the base becomes less important, and your bonus opportunity becomes significantly more important. I know that I didn't give you every salary range, because I probably can't. But yeah, I mean, coming out of college, you should be squarely as a software engineer, looking for a salary probably more closer to the $75,000. That's right out of college. Right, so grow kind of exponentially year over year. You can kind of do the math of where you would be in 10 years.
So how's the proportion of the bonus versus the base salary?
It depends on the role that you have. There's no standard I could give you that would apply to every company or every role. I can just generally say, as you get higher up and later in your career in consulting, your bonus opportunity becomes more significant of your total compensation package. And you get less worried about percentage increases on your base. You get more concerned about what's my bonus and variable component. It can be, yeah, it can be. Especially if you want to or interested and capable in doing new business development. That's really where the big opportunities. And the second one would be internal practice development. Building out a mobile practice or building out a Hadoop practice or something along those lines also has a lot of significant value to the organization. Yes?
What kind of rules do you have if you, as a consultant, you come into a client and the client just really likes you and they want to hire you full time?
Yeah.
What kind of rules do you have in terms of coming to a client site and then wanting to?
Yeah, nothing irritates me more than that. I can tell you, most companies will not fight a client on that. because they're thinking much more longer term relationship with the client, right? So we have had situations where we've had consultants go native and start to take a full-time employment opportunity at the client, but most of the time, if you're kind of mid-career and somewhere between mid and upper career in your in your professional path, you should be mapping in at sort of a director or higher level, and then those people become buyers of our services, right? They become advocates on our behalf. So it can be a win-win situation for everybody. So definitely our firms, we don't like it and we don't encourage it, but if that situation arises, we will support it, because at the end of the day, we want our clients to be happy and the people that work for us to be happy as well. And if you have a consulting company that's trying to prevent that from happening, I would wonder about the culture of that company. Yeah. Got to think long term. All right. Any other questions? Yes.
What exactly, I know you mentioned contracting business and consulting. What exactly makes it different?
Yeah, that's a great question. Does anybody else share my opinion that contracting and consulting are different?
Yes, sure.
Yeah? How would you answer the question?
Contracting, you're working by the hour doing what the client tells you to do. Consulting, you're responsible to come up with a solution and tell them what to do.
Mm-hmm. Would anybody add?
Contracting, the career goes nowhere.
I will say, I think contracting, the plus of contracting is that you're maximizing short-term income, right? You probably can make more per hour, but you don't have health benefits, right? You got to factor all that in, but you're probably making more per hour or per year than if you were in a consulting or industry role. But there's a significant downside of it, and when I look at resumes, if somebody has been contracting every year for the last 3, 4, 5 years, it is a negative, because there's a perception of you're going to leave for the next bigger thing. You're not interested in creating a career for yourself within a company, and you're kind of doing that job hopping is how it's perceived. You may have very good reasons for contracting, but looking at it from a perspective of a hiring manager, it does raise some red flags. So I would caution and be very cognizant of how you manage your contracting as you into your career. I don't know if anybody else has a different definition, or Ron, if you do. Consulting to me is you've got an ownership in the solution. You've got an entire organization behind you, right? So when I'm at a client doing delivery, I've got the entire competency of my office behind me. I've got knowledge bases, best practices, methodologies, competency leads, subject matter experts that I draw on to bring a solution to a client, and I'm responsible for delivery. I'm not just as you said, I'm not just doing what the client tells me to do. I've got to come up with innovative solutions to bring to the client. And usually you're owning an end-to-end solution, as opposed to doing an individual slice of a particular project or whatever you're working on. Does that answer your question? Okay.
So how different is your company versus the company which is in the industry but we provide professional service?
What would be an example of that?
Example, like the company in the industry, they also maybe competing with you and others and to bid for a project. And once that project is running and people in the company is working on that and providing maybe consulting services or maybe providing managed services in-house.
I'm not aware of a situation where a consulting company is competing with the industry. I may be misunderstanding the question.
We do talk a little bit about that as a consulting alternative, if you will, in 2 slides here. The remaining couple of slides of content of the presentation are about the where. Where can you focus in industry and where can you focus in consulting? And we do spend a little bit of time on that. I see we're running very short on time here. If you like, I'll skip ahead to that.
Yeah, good idea.
Okay, great. This slide is basically about the distribution of industry opportunities. This is based on a professional survey of industries that are most likely to hire technology folks, and the size represents essentially the magnitude of the type of how many technical or development people they're hiring in these industries. So those are the industry options. We'll go on to the consulting options, since that's what we're talking about. Okay, so we talked about the large multinationals. We were talking about the Capgeminis and the Accentures. We've talked about the local-based models. Something that we've mentioned just briefly in passing are boutique or niche operations, something that focuses very narrowly on a type of product, very narrowly on a sector of industry or something like that. And the other alternative to this is the consulting arms of product or service companies. Everybody's aware of IBM's consulting arm. Oracle has a consulting arm. My next door neighbor is a consultant for Cisco. So that's the other alternative that we're talking about, and that's we consider that a consulting path. Any questions we could answer on that?
You know, we're kind of rushing through the end. We don't want to keep you guys away from the happy hour opportunity. But there's a lot of variety that you can have in industry or in consulting in terms of where you put your focus. And if you happen to be in an industry position but have some of those characteristics and traits of a consultant, there's always internal consulting organizations, right? Within, you know, Porsche, for example, has an internal consulting arm. GE has internal consulting arms. So many companies have recognized that they can build that consulting competency within their own organization and realize, you know, economies of scale and some cost savings, and not have to hire the big firms or even the local-based consulting firms. So I would, you know, just to close, I would recommend, it's always interesting to see how your personality is aligned with your job. Take that test and we'll email it to you. It takes about 5 minutes. It might be an eye-opening experience to realize, you know, maybe there's opportunities for you to adjust how you're approaching your career to align with your personality traits. So with that, I will say thank you for your time and for listening. We certainly appreciate it. Hope it was an interesting dialogue for you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.